This is the last talk in this segment on architectural form. And honestly, I'm trying to bring it home here. I would love to make the point of how important architectural form is in a culture. What an extraordinary tool it is for communicating cultural values, for moving the mark, for making a difference, for changing our world. And I sincerely believe in the buildings we'll be looking at here, you'll be able to see how architectural form can make an enormous difference in our perceptions, our ideas, our attitudes, and really make a difference in the world. The two buildings we're going to be looking at in this talk both have difficult tasks. They're meant to talk about very, very extraordinary and painful problems in society. And they're meant to talk about in a way that hits us in the gut, that makes us feel something, but also hits us in the head and makes us understand something. Both of these are moving, incredible buildings, and both of them have had a big impact in the kind of commentary they create in 20th, 21st century world about the issues they're dealing with. The first of these buildings is the Jewish Museum in Berlin by Daniel Libeskind. This was done in 1999. Now, it really was meant to deal with a problem that had been very evident in the 1930s when the Holocaust happened and all around World War II, these horrible atrocities that were happening to Jewish people in Germany. But it really took until the 1990s for the Germans to begin to say, well, we've got to deal with this. We've got to deal with it overtly. We've got to really look at this issue. And so they made the commitment to create this museum that would be about the Jewish experience in Germany, not just in the Holocaust, but really for decades and centuries that led up to that. Danny Libeskind was the perfect architect to do this. Libeskind was Jewish. His family had been from Poland, and they were very much victims of the Holocaust. 14 of his family members died at the Germans' hands in the Holocaust. So his family had suffered in this, they'd suffered because of this issue. So Libeskind there were other architects being considered, but certainly he was the favorite in terms of just emotionally connected to the problem. He had been born in 1946, right after World War II, and his family had moved to Israel. He'd lived there for a few years and then moved to the United States and grew up really largely in the United States. So he's an American, but is very much connected to this Jewish heritage in Germany. The site for this building was quite interesting. There was an existing traditional palace there and a garden that went with it. And then the addition to that was to be the core of the Jewish Museum. And that was a challenge from the beginning. In the competition drawings, you can see Libeskind showing the existing building over here and this sculptural set of buildings that are meant to plug into that and to give a very different message than that very serene and staid and conventional image that was there, something that was completely different. And actually the experience of this is remarkable. You walk in the front door of that traditional building and you go into a lovely lobby and nice rooms there. And then you get your tickets and you get oriented and all of that. And then immediately you go subterranean. There's the older building there. You go down the stairs right here and you get into tunnels. And there is the axis of exile that goes in that direction into the garden we'll be looking at, and the axis of the Holocaust right there, and a complete kind of train crash of spaces and orientations, and extremely confusing. These tunnel-like spaces where you feel like you're being herded like cattle. It's a popular museum. There are lots of people. You're sort of moving lockstep down there. Unpleasant, not beautiful. A very kind of forced march through those spaces. You actually want to end up here, where there's a stair that takes you up to the exhibits. But all of that you experience initially is really quite unpleasant and confusing and intentionally conveying something extraordinary about the Jewish experience. Then when you get up to that upper level, then there are galleries. Again, not easy to negotiate your way through those galleries. They're a little bit confusing and irregular for sure. And then finally up to the third floor, where there begin to be these light wells that orient you a little bit another direction. But in general, the whole experience of the place is confusing and disorienting. And it's meant to let you know what it's like to be in a culture where they could pull the rug out from under you at any moment. Two of the things we'll look at in particular, what's called the garden right here, and the Holocaust Tower that's right here, which are only accessed subterranean through those tunnels at the bottom of the building. The general look and feel of the building is dour. It's like a concentration camp. It's gray, it's a little depressing, it's metallic, it's hard, it's cold. All of those feelings of the building are meant to talk about the kind of feeling of being a Jewish person in Berlin. This is the garden, although garden's a funny word for it. That was what Libeskind called it. But it is 7 concrete towers by 7 concrete towers, making 49 concrete towers in a square. So again, very strong geometry here. Each tower is a square. They make a square 7 by 7. All of those are filled with dirt, and in the top are trees that come out of that dirt. Now, this is again numbers, mathematics, and geometry, and it again just shows you how deep and sophisticated the messaging is here. Of course, 7 is a very special number in Jewish life. God made the creation in 7 days. On the 7th day, he rested. The 7th day is the Sabbath. That's the holy day in Jewish religion. So 7 by 7 is a very meaningful numerical relationship. All of the columns are filled with dirt from Germany, except the very center column. The very center column has dirt from Israel. If you take that one column away from the 49 columns, it's 48 columns that remain. And 1948 was the year of the founding of Israel. So there are Jewish numbers, numerology, religious symbology that's built into this garden that you enter subterranean. And as you come to it on this lower level, you emerge outdoors and you walk along these spaces between the 49 columns. And as you're walking along there, you have no idea when somebody's going to come in the other direction and just freaking bump into you. And it happens all the time. Because the spacing is such that that's just wide enough for me to walk in, and I can't see anything else. And it gives you that sense of what it's like to be in a place where you could be ambushed at any moment. You could be completely thrown off. And again, it is giving you a psychic and spatial experience that is meant to convey to the kind of content of what this place is meant to commemorate. So as you walk along in there, you can look up. And when you look up, you see the sky altered by these trees that come out of those big concrete columns. Throughout the building, the elements of form are used very specifically to convey a meaning. So the rhythm in the building is not regular rhythms. It's random rhythms. It's kind of disoriented, irregular rhythms. The line in the building is sharp and tinsel and almost painful. It seems like the building's been lacerated by the lines in the fenestration. So just at the moment where it's meant to be most stable, then it just cuts and lacerates away at the building so that it actually seems very unstable, very fragile, very insubstantial. So every element of form is there, the color, the material, the textures, the line, the rhythms, to convey a sense of insecurity, vulnerability, danger. And then that's the same way with the experience inside, this sense of being, moved like cattle along in these tunnels. It's not beautiful. They're not fine finishes, or it's very, very cold and harsh and kind of dull there. And then at a certain moment you turn a corner and, oh my gosh, it's warm and rich, and there's beautiful wood and a nice light quality, and you wander off of that path, and that's the archive. And that's where people can find out about their families and the history of their family and where their family came from and where loved ones might have been. And so it has a completely different feeling. Now it's not forced march. Now it's not dull materials. Now it's not crowded. It's spacious and it's quiet and it's comfortable, and it's got a different message about what this part of the museum is about. Finally, you reach that stair that takes you up to the exhibits. It's a great cascading stair. The structural system in the building is not solid, massive, regular. It's erratic and crazy and disorienting, and looks like the building might be crashing down on top of you. And that's to give, again, this sense of disorientation. When you march up that stair and it comes to the very top of the stair, it ends in a blank wall. Even the handrail just dives into a blank wall. Again, I thought I was going somewhere. Oh, wait, no. Completely frustrated, stopped. This is a common experience in Jewish life in Germany, and that's depicted in the building. Now, this building had a very interesting birthing. So usually when you're doing a museum building, you're designing the building and they're designing the exhibits at the same time. And they're meant all to culminate so that the exhibits are installed in the building and there's an opening date and everything coincides. Well, as you can imagine, trying to figure out the content for the exhibits of this building was extremely difficult. And in fact, the committees and the groups that were working on that had a very frustrating time of it. And so when the building got finished, the exhibits were not finished. And in fact, they were a long way from being finished. So there were several years when the building sat empty. And in that period of time, people were very curious. It obviously was a very striking building on the outside, and they wanted to be able to experience it on the inside. So this weird thing happened where they opened the building up with no exhibits. So here's a museum. All you can visit is the building itself. So I was in Berlin in that period of time, and you had to make a reservation and make special arrangements, but you could get in to see the building just as a building. And it was extraordinary. This was it, just empty. But the feeling in those spaces and the just emotions that are created were really incredible. The day I was there was a dance troupe from Russia, a Jewish dance troupe that was in there dancing. And just because that space was inspiring to them of certain feelings that they wanted to incorporate in their dance. And then finally, the exhibits got ready and they started to put them in. And there was a hue and cry among some people who said, no, don't put exhibits in it. The building is so powerful by itself, it doesn't need to have exhibits. But in fact, of course, they did have exhibits. And today, with the exhibits in many parts of the building, there's a wonderful kind of dialogue between the architecture that is didactic, is telling you things about the Jewish experience, and the exhibits that then are giving you maybe a more fine-grained accounting of what was happening there. And then I'll have to say there are other moments where I'm afraid the exhibits kind of overwhelm the architecture, and I feel a little loss of the power that was there initially. But there are two spaces that are not compromised at all in the final building and that are really, really incredible, powerful architectural form that conveys a really striking message. This was again a collaboration between Daniel Libeskind and an artist named Manish Kadeshman, and it is called the Memory Void. So it's a very, very tall space with light coming in up above. It's all concrete surfaces through there. And it's in a part of the museum where you'd really like to walk here, go across there, and enter a door on the other side. That's a natural path of movement. So people are coming to here and they're ready to walk across there. But on the floor are all these discs of metal. And generally you walk out like this guy has done. And what happens is these discs rub up against each other. And they make this really awful grating sound, squealing, grating sound. And the reverberation is so much in that space that it amplifies the sound enormously. So the minute you start walking across there, you're making this horrible screaming sound, and it's reverberating in the whole space. And honestly, most people walk a few steps there, and they just can't stand it. They go back, and they find another way to get around to that other part of the museum, rather than walking across there. If you look down at those discs, you actually see the faces of people and kind of screaming faces there, agony in their faces. And that whole combination of the space, the light, the acoustics, it's a very powerful experience. For me, the most kind of telling moment in the whole museum about the experience of Jewish people in Germany. The other space is what's called the Holocaust Tower. It is right there. You enter it again, subterranean, and they just let in a couple of people at a time. So they'll open the door, a couple of you go in there, and they shut the door behind you. And it's this very, very tall space. It's black, painted black there. There's a tiny little sliver of light that comes in at the top. Again, extremely reverberant. You can kind of hear your own breath, hear yourself breathing because it's reverberating in there. And it feels very claustrophobic. It has just heightened the sense of containment to the nth degree. And you're in there for just a few minutes, but you just want to get out so badly. And again, it's using architecture, using architectural form, all of these characteristics we've been talking about, geometry, light, space, shape, color, material, to convey something to your gut, to your soul, that then is maybe more powerful than any of those little paragraphs of words that are on the exhibits in the museum. And in fact, this museum has been extraordinarily well received. People find it truly, truly revelatory about the Jewish experience in Germany. And it just demonstrates the power of architecture to convey great cultural ideas and to really help us grapple with some of those ideas. The second building I want to talk about today, I think, is equally powerful and wonderful and important. It's much more recent. This is the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Actually, there are multiple architects on this. The lead designer is David Adjaye, but there are other important African architects as well. David Adjaye is actually not African American, he's African. He lives in London and practices there. And it was done in 2016. It's on the Mall in Washington, D.C. So at this end is the Lincoln Memorial. At this end is the Capitol building way down the other way. The Jefferson Memorial is over there. The White House is over here. It is the heart of American cultural exhibits. It's where the Smithsonian is. And all around it are these white buildings. the Capitol's white, the White House, the Jefferson Memorial, the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, all of them white. And in the midst of that is a building that is starkly not white. All of the center of Washington actually is these white to cream colored buildings. And standing apart from that is a building that's very, very, very different. In addition to that, all of those buildings are kind of classical buildings. They're very heavy, they're very ponderous, they're very traditional, and they're in Western culture. And all of that is just surrounding you everywhere in the mall in Washington, D.C. And here's this building that says, you know something? That's not the whole picture. And very overtly is not white, but is this kind of chocolate ebony color. And that is not heavy and ponderous, but is light and delicate, is not classical by any means. In fact, kind of defies gravity in a completely different way than the other buildings around. And makes a statement of, there's another story to be told here that is not the story of the rest of what's here in the mall in Washington, D.C. Very, very powerful statement of independence and an experience that's different from perhaps mainstream American experience. It is really based on a geometry here that came out of African folk art. There is a particular headdress of a figure in African folk art that had that kind of 3 tiers like that. But it also is a form, a geometric form, that is analogous to a lot of what one finds in folklore and culture in Africa. And then the actual surface of the building is this kind of textile surface. Of course, African culture is very rich in textiles and actual weavings and baskets and things like that. And this more organic and more intricate and more woven kind of feeling. So it's really drawing on, in a kind of abstract way, all of these rich traditions of making and artisanship in African culture, and making it into a very crisp, clean, contemporary building there on the mall. You walk into the building and there's this great welcoming gesture of the porch. You come through and into a bright, airy, open kind of lobby space, generally kind of getting your orientation to the building. And then the very first thing you're meant to do is to go down into the ground. And there are 2 ways to do this for most people, and what they really intend you to do is you go onto this enormous elevator, an elevator that holds 50 or 60 people easily. And you walk into this room that is an elevator, and then that room descends deep, deep, deep into the ground. And more of the building is below ground than is above ground. So you're going deep into the earth. And as you go down into the earth, you come to this very dark space, several levels of dark, no natural light, and the exhibits are very striking, very tactile and palpable, and one gets the sense of kind of miserable enslavement that African people went through when they were brought to the United States. So that first gesture is to take you back to the beginning of African culture in the Americas. And it's a very dark, very dismal, very oppressive kind of space and experience when you're down there. And then you slowly begin to come up through the exhibits there. You begin to get little bits of hope occasionally there. And then you rise up and get into light once again. And that's kind of the post-Civil War period, is once you get out of the underground. And then finally you get into areas that are much brighter, the exhibits are completely different. The space is different, the light is different. It's much less kind of claustrophobic. And then it talks about, the role of African American people in the military, the incredible role of African American people in the arts like music and dance and theater. It talks about the role of African American people in sports and then there are civil rights and leadership and politics. And so as you get up in the building, you begin to get much more about empowerment and being enfranchised, and now you're elevating up in the building, and at a moment you're looking right straight out at the Washington Monument. Yep, I'm right up here with the rest of the culture struggling together at this point. So at every stage of the building, the architecture is conveying this transition, and it's really quite moving how that works in the movement through the building. In the end, there is this kind of wonderful experience of being on the mall, being a part of the most kind of potent American political scene, and yet always veiled from it, always separated from it, never completely engaged in it. Very powerful sense of that connection and disconnection. And I think really a striking statement about what are we grappling with here. Now, this building has been incredibly, incredibly popular from the day it opened. You can't get into this building without reservations way, way, way in advance. And it's been open for years. I thought, I go to Washington frequently, and I just thought, I'm just going to wait until the crowds die down, and then I'll just walk in one day. No, the crowds have not died down. They just keep coming and coming and coming. Because there is something here that's speaking to us about a very difficult problem we're grappling with, and about a set of cultural experiences that we need to understand better. And the building helps us understand those cultural differences better. In both of these cases, both the Jewish Museum and the African American Museum, this is architectural form, color, light, shape, space, movement, geometry, organic qualities, all of these things being used in service of conveying messages. Who are we? How have we dealt with this issue? What are the horrible things that have happened here? What are the hopeful things that have happened here? And how can we understand that in a deeper way? Now, that's there in words in those exhibits, but it's not nearly as powerful, I think, in words without that incredible reinforcement in feeling and an experience that's there in the architecture of both of these amazing cultural institutions. Okay, see you next time.